Here we are with the second batch of bottom 5 stinkers, this time for 2023. Similar to my 2022 stinkers list, in this video I will reflect on the Eurorack modules I found that did not fit my specific needs, or modules that were too complex or overloaded with button combo presses to configure. It is important that I state up front that these are my opinions and in no way should be taken as fact or a deterrent for you to try any of these modules or brands yourself. I'm simply stating here what did not work for me and why, and this is why they were ultimately sold. Also, I have a cold. Forgive my deep late-night DJ voice. All of these stinkers are long gone as of this recording, so I cannot demonstrate why they are stinkers except to reflect on their modular journey episodes where they clearly frustrated the hell out of me. To start with, ask yourself, what do I never use or is impossible to use or sounds like crap? To front load this video, here is my 2023 list of what I'm going to go through. The Doepfer A178 THER modules are just utter crap. Sorry, Doepfer. The Winterbloom, Castor, and Pollux is a lovely voice, but it's too clunky to use for me. The Afterlater Audio Steps is a great module, I just never found a use for it. The 4MS Company's Spherical Wavetable Navigator is a monster of a module, but it's way too complex. And I've discovered I actually detest the sound of wavetables. And lastly, the Instruo SCION. So that's it. I am done with Instruo modules, except Oct. Kinda love Oct. So now I'll break down why these are stinkers to me. The Doepfer 178 THER units, which are little theremin devices. Holy crapola. Anyone who is unfortunate enough to sit through my failed attempt at the theremin module demo knows how bad this was for me. Maybe somebody watching this can explain this to me because I have no idea what the fuck is going on. But here's where the problem lies for me. I hope you can still hear my voice because I'm having to stand really far away from the module so I don't, excite it. Somebody's going to come along and tell me, well, did you tune it using the trim pot on the back? Well, okay, let's do that. I'm pretty sure that these are going to be utterly useless to me, and I'm not going to actually be able to do anything that I want to do with them. Between some real-life drama and this specific module alone, it broke all interest I had in modular synthesis for 4 months. It wasn't all THER's fault, of course. I was peaking burnout. I had new job woes, real-life tragic loss, and if I may, anxiety and depression about things I had no control over, TMI, I know, and I collapsed under the weight of all that pressure and failure, and well, it just happened to be while the video camera was rolling, recording the THER episode. What did come out of this psychotic episode, though, was a new mantra. If it doesn't work instantaneously, sell it and move on. No more wasted time convincing hardware or gear to work for me. There's way too much stuff out there to get hung up trying to make something work. Square peg, round hole, you hear me say that a lot. It either fits or it doesn't. The A178 THER modules are proximity sensor radio antennas that, when you bring your hand or any thing emitting a slight electronic field near the antennas, the module generates voltage equal to the scale and threshold that is configured. The main problem I had with THER is that my modular case itself was so noisy, I could never get the THERs to tune correctly even when using offsets or adjustment pots on the back, and only really came close to working once I isolated it 3 or 4 feet away from the modular. This was just not going to work for me. I tried following J. Daniel Kramer's guides on using the THERs, but I think his implementation was far more complex than I could understand, so ultimately I ripped the 2 THERs out of my case and sold them. It took months for me to recover from that frustrating failure, along with getting real life back in order. Thankfully, in September of 2023, I got on the phone with a guy named Kays, a writer for Synth and Sound magazine who had questions for me about modular synthesis, and that reinvigorated my interest in making bleeps and bloops again. And well, I was able to finish season 3 of my modular journey by December of 2023. But the THER was not the only thing to go that year. While this next module is not a stinker at all, the specific unit I received came out of the box with issues in hardware assembly that started the downhill slope to a negative experience. On this Castor and Pollux version 1 hardware, I could barely turn the pots due to a mounting misalignment during manufacturing. Fortunately, the designer of this module got a hold of me directly, and after a few back and forths with me taking pics and making videos to show Thea what was going on, we were able to brute force twist some of the mounted pots into a better alignment with the panel, so at least the knobs would twirl unimpeded. However, this was a bad first impression, except for how wonderful Thea was to dive in and offer some help on a Sunday afternoon. Where the stinker portion of this might come in is with respect to what I initially thought was sheer brilliance in the design of the external editor that was web-based. Connecting the Castor and Pollux via USB to a PC and being able to tweak numerous settings in theory was brilliant. Nothing I had ever seen before, but in practice, this wound up being a gigantic pain in the ass. It required a very specific browser, I believe it was MS Edge, and the only computer I have in my entire house that has Edge on it is a laptop that I had to drag out every time I wanted to tweak a setting on the module. My primary computer is Mac OS, and I have Chrome, Safari, and Firefox, and nothing else seemed to work with the web tool, so that was just a pain. When it worked though, it worked absolutely brilliant. I see other module designers taking this approach too, like FXAID's firmware builder and the Ornament Crime Phaserville GitHub Actions firmware customization bot. How's that for a mouthful? These are just truly magical solutions. The final blow to Castor and Pollux came when I could not seem to get the CV out of the sub-oscillator range when I tried to set a pitch. I have no idea why this was the case. I would send in nearly 5 volts, yet the tone that played back was a C1 or lower, for example. This is the bottom of the oscillator right here. And I believe this had something to do with the external editor, and I must have screwed something up. The multi-button or long press configs for built-in LFO and or phasing effects were kind of neat, but ended up being nothing I would use. And finally, the 9 simultaneous outputs were really cool to play with, but again, ultimately it's nothing I would ever do with a single module anyway. As for the based on the Juno chipset thing, I will say Castor and Pollux is an amazing sounding module. I love the rich, fat, similar enough to Juno sound that was created. But once the module sat unpatched for nearly 9 straight months in my rack, I pulled it out and sold it off. There is a version 2 now, so I may try Castor and Pollux again in the future. I really do love the sound, and I want to support independent designers as often as I can. Again, not a stinker, so definitely a module worth looking into as it evolves. Let me reiterate that while I did call this a bottom 5 stinkers list, it does not mean these modules are garbage at all. It just means in my specific collection, what did I end up not using so much, or at all, in 3 years of module exploration. The next one is Steps by Afterlater Audio, and anyone who's paying attention to my channel knows I am a huge fan of Afterlater Audio, bigly. I own more ALA modules than any other manufacturer except maybe Chaos Devices, so do not misinterpret this to mean Steps is bad. It's just not for me, and here's why. It sat in my main case for over a year after I made its episode in 2022, and then was not patched a single time into anything I did afterwards. I cannot really tell you why, I just never found it useful. I did like the random looping outputs, but I found the range or scale tuning to be too oddball, and thus I never used it for sequencing or pitches. I did use it a few times for sample and hold like voltage for modulation, but other than that I couldn't fit it into any of my creations. In 2023 the rule was anything that sat unused for 6 months can go. There's nothing inherently wrong with Steps, I just never used it, so I sold it. No one was more shocked than me when I pulled Spherical Wavetable Navigator out of the modular case and stuck it in a box, and then shelved it for 9 months. SWN in and of itself is a behemoth of a module with 6 channels and voices and LFOs that can act as a 6-step sequencer and virtually endless wavetable audio that it can generate on top of custom wavetables you can make, and well, there you go, complex. I tried to love SWN, I really did, but to be perfectly honest, I despise wavetable synthesis. I really just hate it, and I cannot tell you why. Maybe because for a few years here, wavetable synthesis saturated the market and every thing was a wavetable synth, and even my beloved Novation Summit and ASM Hydrasynth have wavetables in them. But if I never hear another wavetable synth, that would be wonderful. I really do hate it. But that's not why I sold SWN. As I said, SWN is a beast. All that power in a Eurorack module can be amazing. I, however, not being a fan of wavetables, only heard one thing come out of SWN. That squawky, high-mid grating tone that everybody thinks is amazing about wavetable synthesis. The multi-button combos were just too much to bear. The configuration, while I did start getting used to it, was still too much for me to manage. I wanted multiple things to happen with the 6 voices, but ultimately all that SWN offered was a left-right stereo output. No matter what you tried, everything still got summed together. Maybe if each of the 6 voices had an output for multi-tracking, I don't think this was the case. Or at least I couldn't figure it out. And with that, the manuals, plural. Did you see the manuals? They were 100 pages long. Huge amounts of stuff this monster module could do. In the end, it ultimately was sold not due to the sound or size, but its complex nature. I barely have any free time as it is, so lamenting over config options to get one module to do what I needed to do became boring really fast, and I just stopped using SWN. In hindsight, 4MS Company also makes Ensemble, which when you see my top 5 desert island list, is my favorite oscillator. It too has multi-button combo presses, tons of switches and knobs for various options, but in 3 years I've explored almost nothing about Ensemble aside from the amazing filth that belches from this blessed beast of a module. SWN could have been that if it weren't for the nails on a chalkboard wavetable noise that I truly hate. Sorry, wavetable lovers. Alright, I think I'm done with Instruo. Not only are the modules extremely high priced, like the Moog of modular type pricing, and niche little monsters, my bad experience with Looper did not sway me from wanting to try to make my plants sing. SCION is a biofeedback module. When sensors are hooked to living organisms, pick up slight electronic signals that are amplified to modular levels in SCION. There are many examples of this on the internet, including some of my favorite sorcery, watching mushrooms modulate. However, I got SCION in early 2023, stuck it into the main case, and there it sat untouched for months. I mean to say, I never even broke the seal on the biofeedback sensor baggie. Nor did I ever once plug a patch cable into it. The reason for this was, upon mounting the hardware in my custom-built Prototype E case, because my 168 HP rails were not perfectly aligned, the SCION bottom buttons would stick when pressed. Almost instantly you heard me say, "You gotta be kidding me." I fiddled with my rails a bit, but with all other modules fitting perfectly, the fault here was the bloated buttons poking out the bottom of the SCION, just enough to make tapping the buttons frustrating. I never touched it after that day, and that was day 1, and it sat in the case getting dusty for a year, and by late 2023 it was pulled out of the rack and put back in its box and headed for reverb.com. Honestly, it was an impulse purchase, no pun intended. I do not even have a living plant on my property in this hellscape desert I live in, so I can't even tell you why I purchased this thing. I guess I saw Suture Sounds do a demo that sounded neat and I thought, why not try this out? Well, I didn't bother. And now it's sold. Again, this is not to say it's a bad module, it's just not for me. And if you are interested in biofeedback modular technology, take a moment to go look up what the non-Instruo setups look like. It's mostly DIY and an insane amount of stuff to get this concept to work. I will say, Instruo at least makes this a no-brainer, at least for someone with some brains. Putting everything into one single module with some nifty pads to stick to your pet and let their sweaty belly burp out some control voltage. I mean, why not, right? So in conclusion, at least as of this recording in November of 2024, this is all that has been sold for the modular gear that I have tried, failed, hated, and or sold. Outside of modular specifically, I have also sold my Noodler, my Artiphone Instrument 1, my Keystep Pro, a Boss RC1 looper pedal, a Torso T1, and as you probably know, my Mutable Instruments marbles, rings, veils, and stages modules. None of these items I just mentioned are stinkers in any way, they just ended up being too complex to use, or they were desperate attempts to use random generative tools to help me compose, which none of them did. In the case of the mutable instruments modules, you can check out this video right here to see why those were sold off. I will leave you with this final thought. The new rule for 2025 is net zero. This means before I can buy something new, I have to sell something of equal or greater value first. All of these items I just mentioned have been sold off and afforded me a few new Eurorack modules to try in 2024. So let's see how long those last. To close this out, I need to reiterate that it isn't a hate crime that I have an opinion that it doesn't align with yours. I merely found these devices unusable in my situation and opted to get rid of them and try something else. All of these modules mentioned here, even the Doepfer THER modules that I genuinely disliked, serve a purpose to those that desire that sound or functionality specifically, which is what it all comes down to, using the tools we love to create the sounds we love. Now go out there and create something you love, and if you do not love the sound, ask yourself why. Then flush those turds.